Hey guys, my name is Francisco Hernandez, and today I want to talk about 5 retouching mistakes to avoid. I've been editing or actually retouching photos for quite a while now and learned some things that work and learned that there's things that don't work, and I wanted to talk about those things that don't work in today's video. Every single mistake that I'm going to be talking about in today's video is something that I've actually done in the past, and if you find yourself watching this video and seeing that you do one of these mistakes, then definitely don't be ashamed or anything at all. Instead, maybe take it as a sign to kind of ease up on those retouching techniques instead, because instead of avoiding that entirely, maybe just lowering the level that you're applying of that certain technique will really help the photo just by, again, just lessening that effect instead of completely avoiding it. Before I continue, I do want to let you know that this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people alike. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity with Skillshare. There's so many different classes regarding retouching, photography, cinematography, productivity, and so much more on Skillshare that you just need to go to the site yourself and check them out. One class that I was looking into recently is called The Ultimate Self-Care Playbook, Discover and Nurture Your Centered Self by Jonathan Van Ness. I found it very entertaining and also very helpful because I do take mental health very seriously and think everybody should have a good state of mind because that'll help with your photography, your retouching, and so much more. There is a section on having a good routine, and I found that very helpful because for me, a routine helps me kind of keep in check instead of just slacking off and watching TV shows or playing video games. Skillshare was made to learn, so there's never any ads and they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow where your creativity takes you. If you guys are interested in trying Skillshare out, you can use my link in the description area below because the first 1,000 of you to use that link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. When you guys support the people that support my channel, it allows me to keep making free content, so definitely check out Skillshare. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and just jump right into the very first retouching mistake, which is over sharpening an image. When it comes to taking portraits, there's different factors that can contribute to a sharper image, such as the lens itself being sharp, a faster shutter speed, or if you use flash. But if you achieve a fairly decent image in terms of sharpness, then there's no reason to really push it and make it too sharp because it can lead to some really nasty results. What you're seeing on the screen right now is a fairly sharp image of Victoria, and if it were up to me, I would leave it at this level of sharpness. It's not too soft and it's not too sharp. It's exactly where I want it to be. But let's go ahead and just bring up the sharpness and see what happens. The way that I'm gonna add sharpening is actually the high pass filter method. I'm gonna go ahead and make a copy of the layer, go to filter, go to other, and go to high pass. And then depending on the size of your image, it can be a little bit of sharpness, a little bit of radius actually, or you can go ahead and go to something a little bit higher. But for me, I'm gonna go ahead and just leave it at some weird level and go to maybe 4 and see how that looks like. I'm gonna click OK and change the blending mode to linear light. And you have some really nasty results on the screen right now. Even if I were to reduce the opacity, it still can look pretty nasty. I definitely don't want it to be that sharp. It starts to go ahead and add too much contrast to the colors. And if I zoom out, it might look fine, but let me go ahead and just toggle it off and on. Actually leave it back to 100% and then toggle it off and on. And I just feel like it's too crunchy now. You definitely want to avoid doing this. I actually did a mild version of over sharpening. Let's go ahead and just actually duplicate this layer and then duplicate it a couple more times. And then we have some absolutely gross results. Something like this is definitely something you want to avoid. It can make your photo look really nasty. The second retouching mistake that I want to talk about is adding too much color and over saturating your images. And as someone that really loves color in my own images, I can tell you that back in the day, I did this way too often. There's so many different ways to add saturation to your images, but I wanted to go ahead and just start in Photoshop and just simply get a huge saturation adjustment layer and increase the saturation to 50, which is exactly what I did here. So this is without that extra saturation, and then here's with that extra saturation. Obviously, it looks so harsh. She looks like she's an Oompa Loompa, and you definitely want to avoid something like this. So like I said before, you can just always reduce the opacity of a certain effect and maybe achieve more desirable results. Let's go ahead and just reduce it from 100 to something like 40. And at this level, it looks a lot more natural, but it still has that extra little bit of saturation. Here is the before, and here is after with that extra saturation. And again, it looks a lot nicer with that extra saturation, but not too much. The third retouching critique is something that I actually haven't seen in quite a while, so I guess that's a good thing. but it was definitely something I saw a lot back in 2011 when I was really starting to dive deeper into photography. This retouching mistake is adding too much blur to the skin to the point where there's no texture in that skin and it looks obviously too smooth and just really fake. Again, this is something that has different ways to do it to achieve the same fake blurred skin result. But when I applied this effect myself back in the day, I just simply grabbed the lasso tool, selected the area that I wanted to blur. So let's go ahead and just say all of this area on her cheeks and a little bit on the chin. And then I'm gonna go ahead and go into the filter section, go to blur, go to surface blur, and then you can adjust the radius and the threshold for different results. But obviously something like this is way too much. And back in the day, this is something that I would kind of apply to my own photos. And you can see that it looks really not good. And I'm gonna go ahead and just apply it to more areas like the forehead and the nose and see how that looks like. And it does not look good. It just looks obviously too smooth and not realistic. She looks a little bit like a mannequin at this point. And this is something that you definitely want to avoid because obviously you have the skin looking fake and you want a more natural result. So I think even if I were to go ahead and just reduce the opacity of this effect, this is something where it's a unique case where it won't look good. So I would instead recommend you learn proper retouching such as frequency separation because that can lead to a more natural result in terms of softening the skin. Up next on the list is adding too much brightness to the eyes. And this is something that I used to call alien eyes, and it used to be something that a lot of people did. And thankfully, not a lot of people do it now. I have a curves adjustment layer adding a lot of brightness. And what I'm gonna do right now is just simply paint over the eyes to really increase the exposure of just those eyes. And right now, you can already see that it looks really freaky. Nobody's eyes should ever look like that. And I'm actually applying it not as bad as what I would used to see, which is sometimes being applied a little bit to the eyelid or a little bit off of the eye and just kind of going over the skin. And let me go ahead and just zoom out a little bit, or actually zoom out all the way. And you can see that she looks really weird. If this is still something that you would want to do with your own photos, I would recommend instead just painting over just the eye and not the white area of the eye. So just go ahead and just stay focused on just the eye, and then go ahead and just reduce the opacity to a level that's a little bit more realistic. So let's go ahead and go to 100% to something like maybe 40% and see how that looks like. I'm gonna zoom out and then I'm gonna go ahead and just toggle it off and then toggle it back on. And I think maybe even just a little bit lower, maybe 30% would be a good result. But again, you don't want to get any of that extra brightness on the white area of the eye because then it becomes a little bit too unrealistic. The very last retouching mistake is something called haloing, and I still see it to this day. This is simply when you apply a certain effect to the entire image, but then you paint it off certain sections and it looks too obvious where you painted off that certain effect. So I'll show you guys two examples. The first example is something that a lot of people do whenever they find that the exposure of the background is just too bright, but they just want to darken only the background and not the person. So I have my curves adjustment layer and have the layer mask there, and I'm going to simply paint off the effect off of Victoria, and I'm going to be a little bit careless about it, and then kind of end it like right here. You can obviously see where I didn't leave the brightness on or leave the darkness on the background and instead just painted it off. So now there's a little bit of a glow, a little bit of a halo around the subject. You can see it on the top of her head, you can see it on the side of her arms. And this is a retouching mistake because it's very obvious what you did. You can definitely still achieve a result similar to this, but I would say definitely avoid doing it very quick and carelessly. You want to be very precise and very careful with how you apply it so it's not too obvious. I'm actually going to go ahead and just amplify this result a little bit more by just duplicating the layer, and you can see that it's definitely extra obvious now. And this is probably more or less how I would used to see it back in the day. The second example of haloing that I see nowadays is actually with color. A lot of people tend to adjust color in different ways to achieve different results, and they forget to paint it off of the subject. So with this example, I wanted to go ahead and just warm up the entire image, and you can definitely see it's not very natural looking on the skin. She looks way too weird in terms of skin tones. So sometimes people might apply a certain color effect to the entire shot, and then simply paint off of that effect off of just the subject, and then they'll forget certain areas. So right now I'm painting it off of Victoria, but then I accidentally left it on her elbow here and on this elbow over here, and I see some people just getting a result like this and then just uploading it. And you can see where they applied that extra bit of color, the little bit of warmth on the elbows and other areas where they might have not brushed it off. And again, I'm gonna go ahead and just duplicate this layer 2 times so you can see a little bit more of an amplified result of somebody carelessly applying extra color to an image. Again, this is a retouching mistake simply because it was very careless and very obvious what you did. I actually adjust the colors of my backgrounds all the time, and I actually adjusted the color of this shot here when I uploaded it to Instagram, but I was very cautious about how I applied it and making sure that it looked realistic and not too over the top. When you take the time to properly retouch your photos and make them look as natural as possible while still adding those extra effects that you wanted, then you can achieve something like this instead of something like this. I know this is a bit of a drastic example. It's like all of the retouching techniques combined, the final form, but I still see something kind of close to this result every now and then. So definitely don't make those retouching mistakes and get something like this. You want it to look as natural as possible. And that's pretty much it. I hope this video helped you out. And if it did, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already subscribed. There's so many different retouching mistakes that actually might make a part 2 of this video. So if you want to see that, definitely click like on this video. Take care guys, and I'll see you in the very next video.